Hello, I'm Gil Zilkha. Welcome back to my channel, Essential Classical Music, where we look at the best recordings of the classical music repertoire. This video is taken out of my larger video on the major chamber works. I hope you enjoy it. Let's move on to Beethoven. First, the Beethoven String Quartets. Another kind of Mount Everest, I would say. If you're talking about it, just like with the Beethoven symphonies, although there's also you have Mahler and Bruckner and so forth. But for string quartets, the 16 Beethoven string quartets, I once took a college class just on those works, so it's a big deal. And it's divided. They're divided into the early, the middle, and the late periods. The early being, I think, all pre-1800. They reflect more the Beethoven's classical style, more of the influence from Haydn. Then you have the middle period quartets. And then you have the late ones, which are really towards the end of his life, when he was kind of venturing into different territory. A lot of people consider those maybe the greatest things that Beethoven ever wrote. They're all wonderful. The very first quartet starts out with this very simple dee da da dee da dun, dee da da bum bum. And then all six of them, they have this classical grace, but also with that Beethoven individuality as well. And then the middle quartets start with numbers 7, 8, and 9. Those are Opus 59. Those are the Razumovsky quartets, dedicated to Count Razumovsky. Number 7 is very famous. It starts out with the da 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 dee da da dee da dee da 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 melody, and then it's got this long molto adagio that's really wonderful. And then the other two middle period quartets are number 10, the harp, because it's got this section with this little plucking pizzicati, and then one of my favorites, number 11, the Serioso. That one is just your typical Beethoven drama. It starts out dun, dun, dun. Again, excuse my approximatura. That's not exactly all the notes in there. I'm glad I don't have to sing it on stage or anything like that. And then this wonderful second movement that starts out beam bum 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 bum, and then depending on the quartet, you might hear a dee don dee da don da dee don. Okay, so the breathing with string quartets is a thing. I feel like I should have a separate video just to cover the different quartets, how much they breathe, where they breathe, how audible it is. It's because you don't have a conductor, so sometimes you have the lead violinist and they'll kind of do that inhaling thing. It's a thing that might bother some, but anyways, you might hear it in that spot in certain recordings. And then we have the late quartets, which are just like I was saying about the Bartók string quartets, which also actually I think the same professor that I had that was teaching the Beethoven was teaching the Bartók string quartets as well in a separate class. The late quartets are really something. This is Beethoven really exploring, new and different territory, going beyond the four movements. Some highlights are number 13, has this beautiful central cavatina, the slow movement. And then that was followed originally by the Gross Fugue, which is this crazy intense dramatic piece that I'm sure back in its day just sounded like a bunch of random noise. And it did. It caused quite a stir, to the point where Beethoven removed it from the quartet, published it as its own opus number, and then wrote a alternate ending. It was actually, I think, the very last thing he ever wrote to attach to it. So often, though, you hear in recordings, they'll reinsert the Gross Fugue where it was supposed to be after the cavatina, and then they'll continue on with that later movement. So otherwise, you might hear the Gross Fugue just recorded as its own separate piece. And then you have number 14, which is my favorite Beethoven String Quartet, and I would say probably overall the most popular one. It's just a really intense work. It starts out da dee da ding da dee da. So you got that dissonance there, and then it there's a lot of drama, and then you have this middle movement, which is really beautiful, and then you have this short adagio. Kind of one of those Haydn-esque kind of introduction type things, except this is coming at the end, where you have this something really slow that then goes right into something really more quick. And in this case, it's bum, ba-da-dum, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum. So it's really this wonderful ending. It's just a masterwork. All right, so enough about the works. Let's talk about the recordings. And just like with the Beethoven symphonies, you're not going to want just one. Beethoven is always, his music always opens itself to interpretation. And that's usually, there's the technical proficiency as well, but with Beethoven, there's the saying that the music was better than it can ever be played. That was essentially saying that there's all this room for interpretation, that really there's no limit of where you can go. My top recommendation comes from the late 70s, early 80s, and this is one where they really make the most of that interpretive leeway, and that's the Lindsay String Quartet, a British quartet. It's very well recorded, and the thing about the Lindsay Quartet is they just have this utter commitment to the spirit of the music, to what is being said. Someone once told me Beethoven was so good at making the music speak. It's not just notes and rhythms, it's happening randomly, that he's saying something. What exactly he's saying, if you could put it in words, it wouldn't be music, right? So you can't put it in words, but you can try to interpret it in some way. And Lindsay just really does that. Everything the serious parts, the dramatic parts, the long, beautiful adagios, like the number 7, the Razumovsky, just gorgeously done. That haunting opening to number 14 that I was just discussing, the dramatic gross fugue. So for me, this is an excellent starting point for that very reason, that you have a quartet here that's really communicating the music. So that's my number one choice, but it's definitely not the only one I ever want to have, and definitely not the only one I'll recommend. I also recommend highly for interpretation the Vague Quartet. This is a very famous version from the early 70s, pretty well recorded. As I was just saying about the Vague Quartet with the Bartók quartets, they're a very introspective group, really beautiful tone. I would say compared to the Lindsay Quartet, the Vague is a little bit more, I don't know how else to put it, but more conventional in their tempos. Lindsay tends to be a little bit more extreme because they're really trying to scale those interpretive heights. So you get a little bit more conventional tempos and also a little bit more polished playing, I would say. But in no way is it mechanical. It's very deeply felt, very famous versions for good reason. Now, a sort of modern classic is one from this group that we also mentioned with the Bartók quartets, the Tkach Quartet. This is recorded in the early 2000s. This is really a wonderful version, especially if you like good sound. Just wonderful clarity, wonderful fullness. And the Tkach, very expressive, very dramatic. They also don't leave any stone unturned in terms of communicating the drama and the deep feeling in Beethoven's music. So you can't go wrong there either. Now, another version I want to recommend from right around the same time that the Lindsays recorded their version, the late 70s, early 80s, is the Talich Quartet. This is a Czech quartet that they also, like the Vague, they were known for their interpretations, very deeply felt. They really thought through the music. especially the introspective parts. You don't want to miss hearing them in Beethoven. Wonderful gross fugue, very dramatic, fairly well recorded. It's one of those things where you're almost like, how many Beethoven string quartet versions can I have? And then you hear this and you're like, oh, I want that one too. So it's just an embarrassment of riches. And then have this one as well. This is one of the classic versions, the Italian quartet, also known as the Quartetto Italiano. That's actually how it's written usually. This is the late 60s, early 70s, vintage Philips sound. No issues there. The Quartetto Italiano, they were just one of the immaculate string quartets in the 20th century. You can never go wrong with them. This wonderful singing tone, this wonderful intensity, everything is just played really beautifully and with a real commitment. So this is sort of one of the proverbial classics that you can't go wrong with as well. And then we have slightly newer. This is from the late 70s, early 80s, the Alban Quartet. I was just discussing them again with the Bartók quartets. They came along in the stereo era, and they're just immaculate. If you want sort of more, say contrast, say with the Lindsays, who kind of they go for broke on the dramatic side. The Alban Quartet, they're a little bit more grounded in terms of interpretation and in terms of their finesse and their polish and the beauty of their playing. It's just immaculate. If you want sort of the letting the music more speak for itself, which is saying something when it's Beethoven and when it's this repertoire. You really get that with the Alban Quartet. Beautifully played and excellent sound. And then I also want to mention one, believe it or not, remember Jack Palance, Ripley's Believe It or Not. We have one from this decade, yes, the 2020s. This is an American quartet, the Dover Quartet. This one is really a revelation. When I heard this one, I was like, wow, who are these guys? Excellent sound, wonderful fullness, wonderful clarity. And they also they have this wonderful commitment, wonderful expression, wonderful polish to their playing. The slower movements in general tend to be a little bit on the quicker side, but it never sounds rushed. It's very musical, so that you don't even notice, oh, hey, that's a little faster than these other guys played. You don't even think about it. It's just so musical and intense. The gross fugue is all the dramatic things. Like I was talking about the opening of the Serioso, for example. It just really kind of floors you. So if you want a modern digital cycle, I mentioned the Tkach, that's a must. I would say the Dover as well is also excellent. All right, so I also, of course, have to mention some of the older sets that give us just these wonderful insights, starting with the Budapest String Quartet. This is a very famous version. Now, they did do it in stereo, but this is their version from the early 50s on Sony, right around like 1951, 52. And so it's a little bit on the rough side, but still fairly clear. And again, with only so many instruments, you don't really notice it and you don't really think about it after a while. Just really wonderful insights, a wonderfully expressive, very intelligent group. They had been playing together for decades. One of the great string quartets of the 20th century. The thing about these groups is that the ones that play together and tour together and record together, it's like I was talking about at the beginning with chamber music. It's a group of friends meeting together in a small room. And the ones that have been doing it for a long time together, it's really priceless because they're able to do all these things and move together, and they know kind of what they're wanting to say. And so the Budapest Quartet is especially in this repertoire, it's something that you should hear if you want to be exposed to great chamber music making. Another group that I put in the same category is... where did they go? Here they are. The Hollywood String Quartet. Unfortunately, they only gave us the late string quartets. But, you know, I mean, if you're going to choose, the late quartets are probably the ones that Beethoven is most known for, although, you know, they're all wonderful. But this was recorded in 1957. It's a stereo recording. And the Hollywood String Quartet, they were made up of, as you might guess, string players who played in the Hollywood orchestras. But they were classically trained, and they really were consummate artists. And I'm going to be mentioning them throughout this video on chamber music, and I'm also going to be saying a lot, pleading with Warner, when are you going to put out a box set of the Hollywood String Quartet recordings? They made some of the greatest chamber music recordings ever, and they're really hard to find. It's hard to find them streaming anywhere. You have to look for these Testament releases that are, I'm pretty sure, out of print. They really deserve to be brought back to the public eye and re-released. They were just wonderful musicians, very committed, wonderful expression, kind of the old style expression, the early 20th century style, but also very polished and very insightful. So you don't want to miss them in the late Beethoven quartets. However, I cannot leave the Beethoven quartets without talking about, again, like I was saying about the Casals Bach cello suites, a set that for me is just one of the really great recorded classical music sets of all time, and that's the Busch Quartet from the 30s. Adolf Busch was the founder. He's the lead violin, and this quartet was just really known for their deep insights, the deep feeling they had for the music. They just had this authority about them, of knowing exactly where they were going interpretively, and doing it really convincingly and in a way that's really moving and penetrating. I know that's kind of a hackneyed word, but it's really the only way I can think of to describe it. It's just really wonderful stuff. They did not record all of them. They did do all of the late quartets. They also did the Serioso, and on this set you have the 9th and the 1st. And then this was recorded in the 30s. That's when they were still in Europe. They actually fled during World War II to the States, and then they made some recordings in the 40s, including this one of the 7th and the 13th. Unfortunately, it doesn't include the Gross Fugue. I wish it did. But so you can kind of piece together the majority of the quartets. And the sound, of course, it's especially these 30s recordings, it's fairly limited and dim, but that's not why you're listening to these. It's the wonderful interpretations that are really priceless. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day and happy listening.